The man who helped build one of the most powerful AI systems in history says we have no idea how to control what we've already created. And he's not a pessimist. He's one of AI's biggest believers. Once you understand the contradiction he's living inside, you'll never look at your phone, your job, or your government the same way again. In the next 8 minutes, you'll learn why the technology wave we're riding literally cannot be stopped. How one overlooked concept called the containment problem keeps the world's smartest people up at night. And the one thing Suleyman says we must do in the next decade, or lose the ability to choose our own future entirely. Let's get into it. Chapter 1, The Wave. You can't outswim. The first thing that surprised me was Suleyman's framing of history itself. He's not writing a book about AI specifically. He's writing about waves, those moments in history where a cluster of technologies converge and permanently reshape civilization. The printing press, electricity, the internet. Each one looked manageable at the start. Each one became something nobody predicted. He argues we are now at the beginning of the most powerful wave in human history. And it has two engines, artificial intelligence and synthetic biology. Not one, two, running simultaneously, feeding each other. Here's his key insight in Chapter 1. Every previous wave had a natural break. Steam engines needed coal. Nuclear required rare materials and billion-dollar facilities. The things that made them powerful also made them hard to access. That friction was the containment mechanism, and most of us never even noticed it was there. AI and biotech don't have that break. The cost of building powerful tools is collapsing towards zero. But here's where it gets interesting, because the second idea completely flips what you'd expect to do about it. Chapter 2, The Containment Problem. So the second big idea is what Suleyman calls the containment problem, and it's the intellectual core of this entire book. Containment sounds bureaucratic. It's not. It's existential. Think about it this way. We've always contained dangerous technology through a combination of laws, physical barriers, cost, and complexity. You can't just 3D print a nuclear weapon in your garage. But what happens when the dangerous capability is a piece of software that can be copied, modified, and distributed globally in seconds? What's the equivalent of a locked vault for that? Suleyman's answer, and this is where he's painfully honest, is that we don't have one. Not yet. Maybe not ever in the traditional sense. And stay with me here, because this next part is the whole point. He's not saying we're doomed. He's saying the window to build those mechanisms is closing fast. And most governments, most corporations, most people are not behaving as if that window exists at all. This sets up what I think is the most important and uncomfortable chapter in the whole book. Chapter 3. The pessimist's case made by an optimist. This is where Suleyman does something almost no AI insider ever does. He builds the strongest possible case against his own life's work. He lays out what he calls the pessimist's case in unflinching detail. AI systems could soon operate autonomously across financial markets, biological research, and critical infrastructure. A small group, state actors, corporations, even individuals, could use these tools to accumulate power at a scale history has no precedent for. Democratic oversight could be bypassed, not through a coup, but simply through irrelevance. Here's the data point I couldn't shake. He writes that within a decade, a single person with access to the right AI and biotech tools could theoretically do what previously required a nation state. That's not science fiction. That's the trajectory of the cost curve we're already on. But here's the contradiction that makes Suleyman so compelling. He believes the wave is also humanity's best shot at solving climate change, disease, poverty, He calls it a fundamental dilemma. The same force that could save us is the same force that could break everything we've built. And I didn't believe this framing when I first read it, but the more you sit with it, the harder it is to argue with. He's not being dramatic, he's being precise. He connects this back to something every viewer already knows. Remember when social media was going to democratize information? Remember how that turned out? Now imagine that same dynamic, where the technology outruns the wisdom, but the stakes aren't misinformation. The stakes are biological weapons and autonomous systems making decisions no human signed off on. Now, before I tell you the last piece, I want to show you how all three ideas actually lock together. Chapter 4, the part nobody talks about. Every other summary of this book will stop at the problem. Here's what they miss. Suleyman doesn't end with doom. He ends with a framework he calls broad safety, and it's more radical than it sounds. He's not calling for a pause. He's not calling for a ban. He argues those are fantasies because no single country or company will unilaterally disarm in a global race. Instead, he outlines something harder and more interesting. A new kind of international architecture, part arms control treaty, part technical standard, part cultural shift inside the companies building these systems. He compares it to how we built nuclear non-proliferation frameworks in the Cold War. Imperfect, incomplete, but real enough to buy time. Here's the part that almost nobody in the tech world wants to say out loud. Suleyman argues that the AI companies themselves, the ones racing hardest, may be the ones who need to voluntarily slow down. Not because regulators force them to, because the founders and engineers understand what's coming better than anyone, and some of them have to choose restraint over competitive advantage. He's essentially asking his own industry to do something industries almost never do. Act against short-term interest for long-term survival. Which brings me to what this book actually asks of you. So here's what the coming wave actually comes down to. The most transformative technology in human history is arriving whether we're ready or not, and the only question left is whether we build the guardrails before we lose the ability to. If you take nothing else away, take that. This is not a future problem. The decisions being made by a handful of labs and governments right now are setting the trajectory. Most people will read this book and wait for someone else to care first. That's exactly the dynamic Suleyman says makes this so dangerous. You've now got no excuse. If this one resonated, Suleyman's earlier thinking goes deep on AI and geopolitics. I'll get into that next.